Bible saying about the second advent. It says in verse 14, I looked and behold a white cloud, and upon the cloud one that sat like unto the Son of Man, having his head and a golden crown, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. All right. So where this appearance is, it's an appearance of the Lord Jesus Christ. It appears to be in the tribulation sometime before the actual second advent. So before the actual foot sets down on the Mount of Olives, before he's physically there, that there is this appearance. When he actually comes to land on earth, he does come back on horseback with his army. We looked at Revelation 19:11, Joel chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, and we looked at Zechariah chapter 14, 1 through 21, which are great passages in terms of just the detail of the second advent, all the things that take place there, the battle that takes place. But in the appearance here, found in Revelation 14:14, the Lord is pictured not as on a white horse, but as seated on a throne. All right, well, where's that throne at right now? Well, it's up in the third heaven. It's not down here on earth. And even if you're saying, okay, well, it's, let's say it is physical, it's physically down here, well, then you would be out in the millennium someplace. So where we're at right now is tribulational. So the Lord is pictured as seated on a throne or beside a throne. So this is not the appearance of Revelation chapter 19, verse 11, where he's on a horse and the blood is up to the horse's bridle and all of that stuff. This is not the same appearance where he's sitting on a horse with many crowns on his head. So this is a pre-advent appearance. So this is before the second advent. The exact time is not given, and I don't think I could profess to know when it's going to be, when this particular verse is going to be, other than it's pre-advent. It appears to be during or before the end of the tribulation. Just like Joseph appeared to his brethren before the 7 years of famine were finished. Joseph appears to him. Joseph is an interesting one to look at in the book of Genesis, because I think he's a type of Christ in the Old Testament in something like over 150 particulars when you start looking at the life of Joseph. And so looking at the time span there where there's that famine, pictures the tribulation, and you look at some of the things that happened with Joseph and how he appeared to his brethren. His brethren depict the Jews as a nation there, and he appears to them before those 7 years are finished. It could be that it's a lot like Paul's conversion, right? Paul saw Jesus Christ, even though he was already risen, he was already taken up. The advent had already taken place. All right? So he was saved in a post-resurrection appearance of Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus, and then he began to preach to the Gentiles. So what it looks like is it's the 144,000 are going to see Jesus Christ during the tribulation. So you got these 144,000 Jews, and they're going to see this Jesus Christ sitting or standing at the throne. And that'll probably be a kickoff point for them, to realize, okay, well, that's the Messiah. That's who we need to be preaching. That was Jesus Christ in the Old Testament, and that's the one who we need to be preaching now. So they're going to preach to the Gentiles before the second advent. And I don't know that I can profess to know the time element of Revelation 14:14. It is possible that the exact time won't be revealed until you get into the tribulation, and chances are it'll be revealed to the Jews in the tribulation. They'll read that and like, okay, this is when. Another thing to notice about Revelation 14:14 says, I looked to behold a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man. That's the last time that title is used in the Bible, the Son of Man. And then if you notice at the very end, he says, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. Whenever the Lord Jesus Christ came the first time, he came to sow seed. When he comes back the second time, he comes back with a sickle in his hand. A sickle is meant to harvest. So he planted the seed whenever he came the first time. He comes back the next time to collect. All right, let's look at verse 15. Revelation 14:15. It says, "And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." There's a cross-reference there to a number of places in the Old Testament we'll go ahead and look at. I think you probably see them up here behind me. Isaiah chapter 17, verse 16. We got Isaiah, we've got Jeremiah, we've got James and Matthew. Isaiah 17, we'll start there. Isaiah 17:16. Oh, there is none. It must be 17:6. I type these things up, and I'm usually, yep, it is 6. I'll fix it here in my notes.
Can you reach?
You want me to fix it up there too?
No, I'm just kidding.
Hold on. There we go. Just the 6. Forget it. All right, Isaiah 17:6. It says, "Yet gleaning grapes shall be left in it as the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uppermost bough, 4 or 5 in the outmost fruitful branches thereof, saith the Lord God of Israel." Notice there that it's the gleanings, right? Look at how he describes the harvest, right? It's not a lot. Okay, as the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uppermost bough. Means there's not much left. The closer you get to the end, the less fruit there is to pick. The last great times of spiritual revival, really anywhere in the world, were mostly done. Anybody, even if you take like the Franklin or the Billy Graham Crusades, you look at when Billy Graham was born or where, even if they happened into the 1900s, those are all men that were born, many of them before 1900, right? They come from a Philadelphian church age period. And so they bring a lot of that with them into the 1900s. But by the time you start moving into the 1900s, you start moving into a time period of Laodicea. And I don't take that as an excuse to not try to win souls or make an excuse on why you haven't led a soul to Christ. But you'll notice it in churches is that you don't see people walking the aisles every week, to go and get saved. Or even if you go out and you do personal work, you don't see somebody saved every day, right? It's a big deal when we see somebody saved. Why? It's harder to win them, right? You look at everything that the world has to offer them. Everything that they're distracted with, they're harder to win than they used to be. That's where you got to, why we make a big deal about VBS, because, listen, they get much older than VBS age, and they're hard to win, right? The kids coming into middle school and high school today are hardened. These are hard-living kids. And not just you say, oh, well, they're spoiled, rotten, and they're all these other things. Man, I could tell you about some kids and some of the home lives that they come from and some of the stuff that they've seen. And if you've lived like a fairly comfortable life, I'll tell you what, it has nothing to do with being white, but I'm privileged, right? I've got 2 parents still married. I grew up in a clean home. There wasn't any beer in the fridge. There wasn't any cigarettes in anybody's pockets. Wasn't anybody walking around with a can of Skoal or anything like that. There was a Bible in our home. We maybe didn't make it to church all the time, but we were kind of a church-going family. It was a clean family. There wasn't a bunch of cussing going on in our house. There was a whole bunch I didn't have to deal with, right? There wasn't a bunch of filth to really watch. We were out in the country. We were pretty secluded from everything. That was pretty much what we had. I can't really say much, in terms of, well, I had to battle this, and I had to battle that, and I came out of this, and I came out of that. Praise the Lord, I didn't. I didn't have to go through that. I know a bunch of you did have to go through that. You had a lot that you had to come out of. I know a bunch of kids that are in that situation. I know a young man right now pretty much raising himself. It's a wonder he's at school at all, because there's nobody there to make him go. There's a bunch of kids like that. They come from They come from divorced homes. They come from alcoholic homes. They come from drug-addicted homes. They come from all those kinds of places. And so by the time they're about 10, 11, 12 years old, they're hard. The world has been hard on them. And they've seen some horrible things. They've seen things that their teachers have never seen. And they're going home to that. They don't get their homework done because somebody's screaming all night. They don't get their homework done because somebody's throwing a beer bottle against the wall. Somebody's beating somebody. Somebody's out doing a deal, right? And taking them with them, or making one of their kids, be the designated driver for the night. That's the kind of stuff that and you say, oh, not here. Oh, yeah, here. I'm not just talking about where I work. I'm talking about here. Stuff down the street. It goes on and on and on. You better win them when they're young, because by the time they're about 12, 13, 14 years old, you'll have a hard time reaching them. They're on their way. I'm not saying you can't, but you're in the gleanings, folks. There's here a little, there a little. There's 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uppermost bough, 4 or 5 in the outmost fruitful branches thereof, saith the Lord God of Israel. It's going to get hard. You'll hear some fool say, well, I'll get saved in the tribulation. You want to count on being one of the 2 or 3 berries? One of the, 4 or 5 in the outmost fruitful branch? You think about all that goes on. Go over Isaiah chapter, hopefully I've got the right verses for the right chapter here, Isaiah 26. Isaiah 26, 20 through 21. Isaiah 26, verses 20 and 21. Come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation be overpast. For behold, the Lord cometh out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity, and the earth shall also disclose their blood, and shall no more cover her slain. So whenever he's talking about reaping, it's a different kind of reaping than what I just got done talking about. When he sticks in that sickle, that's a different kind of harvest, right? He's telling, come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers and shut the doors. You don't want to see what I'm about to let loose. I'm about to clean up. There's about to be a harvest, but it's a threshing, or maybe a better word is a thrashing. Go to Jeremiah chapter 6. Jeremiah chapter 6. Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 9, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, They shall thoroughly glean the remnant of Israel as a vine, turn back thine hand as a grape gatherer into the baskets. Right? Thus saith the Lord of hosts, They shall thoroughly glean the remnant of Israel. I'd say you've got a pretty good cross-reference there to the Antichrist army, and what they're seeking to do is to go ahead and finish what it was that Hitler and Stalin, a bunch of those guys, tried to get done years ago, which is wipe them out. And it says, they shall thoroughly glean the remnant of Israel as a vine, turn back hand as a grape gatherer into the baskets. James chapter 5, verse 7. James 5, 7. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain. Okay, so the Lord's preparing for a harvest. And then finally, Matthew chapter 13, 39, probably be a little bit more familiar. Matthew 13, 39. Matthew 13, 39. It says, the enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of the world. So there is a gathering. And what's being gathered is being gathered to destroy, to be destroyed. So it's generally taught that Revelation chapter 14, verse 20, I know that's not where we are, we're in 14, verse 15, but it's generally taught that Revelation chapter 14, verse 20 is one complete picture of the second coming. That's not the case. What you actually have here is a picture of Jesus Christ appearing before the end of the tribulation, and then an interval followed by the second advent, or the second coming at the end of the 7 years. And the truth is learned by noticing the difference in the wording. Notice that two different types of agricultural activities are being described. Over here in Revelation 14:15, let me get back to it. Okay, the difference between 14:15 and 14:20. Okay, 14:15, thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time has come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Verse 20, and the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse's bridle, as the space of 1,600 furlongs. So thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time has come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Okay? So it's harvest. There's a harvest here. Revelation 14:16. It says, and he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And that's the passage in Matthew 13:39 that we just read, and Isaiah 66:8. Let me get over here to Isaiah 66:8. Isaiah 66:8. Who hath heard such a thing? Who hath seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. That's kind of an interesting thing to look at. It says, who hath heard such a thing? That almost sounds like people talking today. Who hath heard such a thing? Or who hath seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? I don't know. Somebody made this point a while back, and I thought it was rather interesting. Prior to about, probably, what would it have been? Probably 1850. Prior to about 1850, basically, anybody who lived like before 1850, you lived nearly exactly the same way that your parents lived. There was very little difference. In fact, you probably lived the same way that your grandparents lived. There was no technological difference between how you lived and how they lived, right? You could see 2 or 3 generations and nothing changed, right? You go back through, and the further back you go, the longer those generations would go, and the more generations would take place with relatively no advancement, no major changes, nothing. Just everything moved really slowly. Now, you wouldn't have necessarily thought things were moving slowly because that's how things always moved, right? There just wasn't a lot of change. Not to say that there wasn't wars and rumors of wars and all that kind of stuff, but you think about it in terms of just how communication and travel went. Things went slowly because it took a long time to get anywhere. Things went slowly because it took a long time to even know anything had happened, right? You had to send a messenger, right? You had to write things and then send that guy, and depending upon how far away it was, by the time you got the letter that said what had happened, that happened a month ago, right? There's not very much we can do about it now. And so what's interesting is as you look at that, who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Haven't you noticed how much can happen in a day? Right? And so these people are shocked. This all happened in one day? I'm betting you that for you, it's a lot less shocking than it was to Isaiah here. Like, man, that all happened in one 24-hour period? I was like, you like to take Isaiah. I was like, listen, man, sit down for a second. I just want you to watch the news cycle for one day and watch how much changes from the time that you woke up in the morning to when you went to bed at night. Just how much the world changed and how much you heard about and where you heard about it from, right? Well, this happened over in Russia. Can you imagine in 1850 knowing what happened in Russia today? You wouldn't. Go ahead.
20 miles a day
Yeah. Yeah, 20 miles a day is as fast. Yeah. And it's amazing how much has changed in that amount of time. You take I use this as a reference quite a bit. 1903 in December, two guys out of Ohio took off on an airplane, self-powered airplane, 1903. 66 years later, a couple of guys get on a rocket ship and land on the moon, if you believe that. I'll just spread doubt, right? 66 years. That means very easily there were kids that were there in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, that easily lived to see the day that they posted it on the news, right, on a television set, right? You know, he probably rode up to the sand dunes there on the beach on a horse, and here he is sitting in a living room on shag carpeting watching somebody walk on the moon. That's how quickly things changed in less than 100 years. So your advancement has become exponential. The rate at which the world changes has become exponential to the point where the earth can give forth in a day and a nation can be born all at once. For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. So the amount of time it takes for something to happen is just like that, happens in a day. Well, listen, the Second Advent, the Battle of Armageddon, that's not like a years-long campaign, right? Like, you know, this thing's like World War II, World War I, the Civil War, it's being drawn. Like, no, this is a day. It's being brought forth in a day. That's quite a thing. All right. Let's see. So notice back in Revelation chapter 14, verses 18 and 19, it says, "And another angel came out from the altar which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the earth thrust in his sickle, and the angel, thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God." You'll notice there in those verses that it's not the harvest of the earth, and it's not the earth that's being reaped. Okay? The harvest of the earth is the gathering of fruit, right? The harvest, and this is where we need to see the difference between two things, because I kind of used two illustrations, one in terms of saved people and one in terms of lost people, and that's really the difference, right? We're talking about two different groups of people here. Harvest is gathering fruit. You want to gather fruit, right? Fruit's good stuff. So in this sense, it's tribulation saints. So whenever it's talking about, man, just a few clusters here, just a few grapes over here, in terms of the people coming out of the tribulation on the right side of things, it's not very many. And we've had that conversation before, you know, in terms of Israel getting out on two wings of a great eagle, and maybe that's a Boeing 77 or an Airbus A380 or something like that. And, well, it can't possibly be that. I mean, they hold like tops 1,000 people, and you might be able to pack more on there, but you're telling me that there's less than, there's less than 2,000 people left of Israel, getting into Selah Petra and all this stuff. I'm like, boy, you start looking at what the Lord is saying about what numbers are getting dwindled down to, there might be room enough that everybody's got a seat, right? You might be able to find a seat with nobody sitting, you might have an empty seat sitting next to you if you were on that flight, if that's how the Lord does it. It may not be that full. It may not be that big of a plane. I don't know. But it seems like, but boy, by the time you get to the end of it, there's not as many. I know you're thinking, man, there's pushing 8 billion people on the earth right now. Certainly, it can't get down to that small of a number. It sure can. It sure can.
Brother Chris, do you have any idea how many people Petra will hold?
How many people Petra will hold? I don't know. That's a good question. It's bigger than a guy thinks.
Ron was in there, and he said it just went on forever back in there.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is that it's a lot of caves. Yeah. And if you did have people back in there, there's nothing saying that they wouldn't expand, right? That they wouldn't dig those caves back in there further if they needed the space. Now, I did hear years ago somebody that had been over there and said that there was a bunch of, Christians go over and they do the Holy Land tours and things like that, and some of them go over to Petra, and said a bunch of them have left gospel tracts over there, which, it's fine. The only problem is that they're leaving church-age gospel tracts for, presumably for people in the tribulation. I was like, where you usually, like right now in the church age, when we give somebody something, we usually give them, like we give them a John in Romans, right? I was like, man, in the tribulation, you better give them like a Revelation and Daniel and an Isaiah, and like it's a different set of books that you need on hand when you're in the tribulation. So yeah, the John in Romans isn't going to fly so well in the tribulation. So go ahead. Yeah, you've already got the angels flying through heaven. Yeah, they've probably gotten it. Well, and you've got the 144,000 Jewish evangelists like, we got this straightened out. That's for that dispensation. We're in a different one now. Different things going on. So, but yeah, the harvest of the earth, that's the gathering of fruit, and that's the saints from the tribulation. Let's see. We've already kind of looked through some of that. In John chapter 5, verse 7, we'll look there real quick before we leave and we've been in verse 16 here. Before we leave verse 16 and get into 17 and 18, we'll look at John chapter 5. Kind of amazing, sometimes we go a month and a half or so looking at one verse, and then, not like tonight, we get through 14, 15, and 16. We're just flying, man. You always like, slow down. John chapter 5, verse 7, it says, the impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man when the water is troubled to put me, hopefully I've got the right passage here, to put me into the pool, but while I'm coming, another steppeth down before me. That's not what I want. I know I must have the wrong chapter or the wrong verse, because I'm looking for, that's the thing, is I type stuff up quickly and don't always get what it is that I'm looking for. But I'm looking for the chaff going into the wine press. So it could be. Have we already been to James? Yeah, we've been to James 5:7. For whatever reason, I've got John there. No. Yeah, I've got James 5:7, but this is in John. Well, in any case, even if I've got the wrong reference, the fact still remains is that you've got harvest and you've got reaping, and the reaping is the negative side of things. That's where stuff is going into a winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of God. That's the chaff. That's the other stuff that's getting stomped. It goes into the winepress to be stomped. That's not a church age rapture. That's the second advent. So we'll come back over here to Revelation chapter 14 and look at verses 17 and 18. All right, verses 17 and 18, it says, Another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle, and another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. The harvest of the earth is reaped and gathered into the barn, as in what you've read over there in Matthew chapter 13:39. And that's harvest, which has to do with fire and to burn something, as in Matthew 13. Now note the difference. One is the harvest of the earth. That's time for the earth to be reaped, but the other one is the clusters of the vine of the earth. The vine of the earth is a very, very important statement. The vine of the earth. Okay? Coming over here to verse 19, it says, The angel thrust in his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. So what we've already read in Revelations 14, verses 15 through 16, a sickle is put into the harvest of the earth, like a wheat crop. That's the sickle. The grain is harvested and reaped for God and put into the barn. That's the stuff that you want. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 16. Deuteronomy 16. Deuteronomy 16:9. And a bunch of this will run references back to stuff that we've already looked at, but Deuteronomy 16:9 will be something different. Deuteronomy 16, verse 9, 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee. Begin to number the 7 weeks from such time as thou beginnest to put the sickle to the corn. Right? We've already, I believe, looked at Isaiah 17:6 and Matthew 13:39 and James chapter 5, verse 7. But over here in Revelation 14:18 through 19, we find something that has incurred the wrath of God. So there's some stuff that goes into the barn, but now there's something else. And God wishes this other stuff, he wants it destroyed. And it's called the vine of the earth. And it's not gathered into the barn, but it's cast into the winepress of God. And then it's stamped on until the blood comes out of it 3 feet high for a space of about 160 miles. Go ahead. Yeah, the 2 different reapings. Right, yeah. I mean, it's easier enough to see that there's one is a harvest and one is a reaping. And you kind of get that in terms of if you've ever heard how just people use those 2 phrases a little differently. If you ever notice that people kind of use that phrase reaping, and it's usually if it doesn't have anything to do with harvest, it's negative. Oh man, you're going to reap that. Have you ever heard somebody? I've never heard anybody use the word reap, in a non-harvest sense where they meant something positive. Have you ever talked to somebody and say, man, you're really going to reap what you sow? You ought to be excited, right? You don't typically, when you hear the word reap, in terms of how that's used, it's used negatively, and I believe it's because the Bible has trained you the right way, the way that word is used. All right, so this is not gathered into the barn, but it's cast into the winepress of God. And that shows us clearly that the second advent is found in Revelation chapter 14, verses 18 and 19, while a post-tribulation rapture is found in verses 15 and 16. So the vine of the earth is a reference to a passage in Deuteronomy, and it's in 32:31. Deuteronomy 32:31. Deuteronomy 32:31. What is it that he's reaping, and why is he so upset about it? Deuteronomy 32:31. And I'll see if I can find, I want to run a reference with this over to another spot, if I can think of it. I'll get some help with it here in a little bit. All right, Deuteronomy 32:31 says this. It says, for their rock is not as our rock, even our enemies themselves being judges. That's a really interesting verse because of a doctrinal stance that's taken by a very specific church in the book of Matthew. And I'm trying to remember exactly where it is.
Is it Matthew 16:23?
Possibly. It is Matthew 16, but it's not 23, it's verse 18. Matthew 16, verse 18. Now, you tell me who gets this verse wrong. This is your Jeopardy question. The Catholic Church. All right? And I say unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. What does the Catholic Church do? They make Peter the rock that they build their church on. Their church is built on Peter. Okay? But what Jesus Christ is saying there, he says, you're Peter, right? Little rock. He says, and upon this rock, referring to himself, Jesus Christ, I will build my church. Now, why didn't the Lord say, but I'm the rock? I think he puts it that way just so a bunch of people break their necks on it. Now, you go back and you keep Matthew 16:18 in mind, And look at the prophetic nature of verse Deuteronomy 32:31. For their rock is not our rock. What does that mean? They're built on the wrong thing. Right. And here's the thing, again, somebody help me with the reference, but Paul puts it this way. He says, for our rock is Christ. And he uses the capital R. Our rock is Christ. Okay, well, that's a really great reference to run to get Matthew chapter 16, verse 18 straightened out. Is if you think, if you take Matthew 16, 18 and you build your entire denomination and doctrine on that, that's a rather weak place to do it from, because it's not especially clear who the rock is. Right? He says, you're Peter, and upon this rock, what would have made sense if Peter was the rock, what I think he would have said is, I say also unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon you I will build my church. Wouldn't it have cleared it up if Peter was the rock? He says, and upon this rock, but he's not talking about Peter. Right? Oh gosh, and this was way back whenever I first started here. I had I forget how many, it's like 80 references that the Bible has with the word rock referring to either God the Father or God the Son every single time. That's when it's not just referring to a rock, but it's always referring to either God the Father or God the Son throughout the entire Old Testament. And so Matthew 16, 18 would be the absolutely only verse referencing a rock and giving that attribute to a person a person. God's a person. Jesus Christ is a person. But to giving that personification to a person that is not God.
It's 1 Corinthians 10:4.
Thank you. 1 Corinthians 10:4. 1 Corinthians 10:4. And did all drink of the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock, capital R, that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Christ is the rock. But the problem happens is that the one world religion of the tribulation is Catholicism. Now, it may be an adaptive Catholicism, different than what you kind of see today, because what they've got to be able to do is they've got to be able to bring in the Muslims. And the Pope, at least I don't know if it's the Pope that they've got now or the Pope that they had before, but he's come out making several statements, and the Catholic Church has stood behind this, is that it's completely acceptable to refer to Jehovah God as Allah. Why? Because we're trying to get everybody under the umbrella.
You look at all denominations is being very ecumenical.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to be taken.
It's not going to take a lot. In fact, it's going to be surprising how little it takes to bring a bunch of Christian denominations under the fold of Catholicism. I'll give you one argument that Catholics make that most, I would say, Protestants are too dumb to refute, okay? Because nobody knows history anymore, and especially Christians don't know history. So I've heard a number of Catholics say something like this: well, all you Protestants used to be Catholics, and you all need to return to Catholicism, the mother church. No. Now, a lot of them did. Your Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Lutherans, they did come out of the Catholic Church. Your Baptists never came out of the Catholic Church. They were never in the Catholic Church, right? The Catholic Church acts like the only church that ever existed was the Catholic Church. There were Bible believers before the Catholic Church formed, and were the entire time the Catholic Church has been here. You didn't come out of the Catholic Church. You were never in it. Now, I'm all for the term Protestant. I think we use the word Protestant really tamely now. What does that even mean? It means that somebody was protesting something, right? What were they protesting? The Catholic Church, right? That's what they were protesting. But you know what? The problem, it used to be that your Lutherans, your Methodists, your Episcopalians, Presbyterians, they all had a King James Bible, and for the most part, early on in their day, they were off on some doctrine, but there's one thing that they all stood their ground against, which is we are not the Catholic Church. We came out from that mess. Now, they may not have gone as far as they should have, but they got out of it. Now they don't know where they came from. They're not protesting anything. And a bunch of them are going right back. And then when you look at the doctrine that most churches and denominations hold, your Baptist churches are going right back to it, or not back to it, they're going to it for the first time, which is baptismal regeneration and no eternal security. Those two doctrines, false doctrines, heresies, those two heresies right there are all you need to be a good Catholic.
And like Rick said, they're all joining together in that.
And I've been, I get asked, but as long as I'm pastor, you can get rid of me if you really want it that bad, but as long as I'm pastor, like I am not joining what's the deal called? The Ministerial Alliance. I'm not joining the Ministerial I'm not getting our church in the Ministerial Alliance. Why? Because they hold hands with the Catholic Church.
Holy Week.
Holy Week would be a good example. But listen, we're not with that. I don't think you should hold hands with somebody that preaches a doctrine that sends people to hell. I think that that's probably something worth disagreeing enough that we're not going to get along on. If we don't get along on that, then we don't have a whole lot to get along on. Go ahead.
When it says in verse 31, for the rock is not as the rock, our rock, even our enemies themselves being judges, some people may say that's not the people in the wine press. But in verse 32 it says, for their vine is the vine of Sodom and Gomorrah, and fields of Sodom and Gomorrah. Their grapes are the grapes of gall, and their clusters are bitter.
See, all you had to do is keep going one more verse, and you got it tied in, man. You got it. Yep, 2 verses. Keep going.
In verse 33 it says, their wine is the poison of dragons and a cruel venom of asps.
Yep, and you see right there where that whole thing connects, and you wind up in a wine press. And why is the Lord upset about it? Because you've got a bunch of people that claim the name of Christ, that claim to be Christians, and let a bunch of people off into a mess and turn them against God. And that's what really makes God mad. You want to know what makes God mad? Look at the order of things and look at the number of things. You look at it in the Old Testament. I remember a preacher putting it this way. You look in the Old Testament and see what God would kill a man for. And you want to know what God really cares about? You look at what God in the Old Testament would kill a man for. And it would be idolatry. He wouldn't kill a man for adultery, and he wouldn't kill a man for murder. But he'd kill a man for idolatry. Why? Because he thinks more about your relationship with him than he cares about your relationship with everybody else. Now, he's not in favor of you hurting a bunch of people, but he's far more concerned about where you are with him. The Lord is always more concerned with the spiritual than the physical. And so whenever the Catholic Church starts messing with the spiritual, he's got a bigger problem with the Catholic Church than he does the UN. Say, well, the UN has started all of these wars and got all these people killed, and well, what about the Democrats and the Republicans and these political parties? He doesn't care one bit about those political parties, but he cares about somebody leading somebody to hell. That's what he cares about. That's what he'll throw somebody in the depths of hell for. If you want to find the bottom of hell, then you get yourself wrapped up in a doctrine and start preaching it and start leading a bunch of people to hell, and you'll find the bottom.
The verse I think of on that ecumenical movement is though hand join in hand, they all get along, the wicked shall not be unpunished.
Yep, though hand join in hand, the wicked shall not be unpunished. I believe that's in the book of Proverbs. So even though it doesn't matter that everybody's holding hands, what was it back in, the 80s, where hands across America, right? We're all going to hold hands. Though hand join in hand, the wicked shall not be unpunished. Doesn't matter how many people you get together and sing songs and everybody agrees. The Lord doesn't care how many people agree. If you agree against him, you're wrong. And the Lord will see fit to hold your feet over the fire for it. All right, we're over on time. We'll get back to this thing of the rock next time. All right, we'll pick up from there on the vine of the earth.